The dark red countries are countries where there are at least 10 big land acquisitions going on. The light red ones are ones with less than 10 documented cases, so where the information is really reliable. And on the pie chart you see the different types of uses. So food production is this big circle here. The fuel is also important in the darker green, and then forestry in some other countries. So these pie charts relate to the countries with the most land. So that just gives you an idea of where we're talking about. In our chapter, we will have to look a bit at the question of the terminology we're using and how the ISG in particular, what does inclusivity, what does sustainability, and what does growth mean in the context of land? Do we mean by inclusivity inclusive access, that everybody should have access, or do we mean inclusivity in the benefits that come out of land? Or are we talking about inclusivity in terms of decision making? So, I mean, you can see that there is some ramifications that we need to work through. And sustainability, agriculture draws nutrients out of the soil. You need to be able to put that back in. And so sustainability is a relative concept, and you can have stronger and weaker levels. Equally, there's a big debate in agricultural circles where how do you get maximum productivity, maximum growth out of agriculture through small-scale, low-tech agriculture or through large-scale capital-intensive. Now, we won't obviously want to go into great depth in that debate, but we need to be aware of it. Here are some of the issues on land and the well nexus. They're fairly obvious. We will have to talk about how land is not productive without water and energy. You need to invest in the infrastructure to make land productive. Sometimes land is being purchased because of the water on it or next to it, and land can also be used for producing energy. So there are various examples of this, and what that implies is that there is a fairly complex decision-making required. You need integrated decision-making, but it will necessarily be complex. You will need high information, and it won't necessarily be easy. So it's a complex area we're getting into. One other thing we've commissioned a paper on is on tenure regimes. We're very conscious that some of these land acquisition deals are the problem. One of the essential problems is the overlap between formal and traditional systems. And so the people at IID in London are preparing a paper for us with a number of the issues listed there. And the central focus of their work will be what is secure land? I mean, security brings with it social safety, income generation possibility, encourages investment. So security of tenure is actually important. And it's not necessarily just traditional land that is insecure. It can also be formally registered land that can be insecure in certain centres. In their paper, they've proposed this chart showing the different types of relationships, how contractual they are. So between the host government and investors, you usually get that sort of heavy black line, you would get a contractual relationship. The dashed line is possibly contractual, and then the dotted line is rarely contractual. So the relationship between host government and local landholders can often be, there's no contract involved in that. Another issue we have to tackle is approaches to land governance. We can look at voluntary approaches, donor guidelines, codes of conduct, but also the incentives for owners to manage land responsibly, or do they just exploit the land to the maximum, degrade the soil, etc. What incentives exist to discourage that or make them work differently. We can also look at regulatory frameworks, tenure systems. I mean, there I would distinguish between three tenure systems: land use decision-making systems, and then how do we ensure that owners manage land sustainably? And each of those will require different mechanisms, if you like. And finally, the line that is 2 minutes left. Okay, the line that's gone off. What does international support have to do? There's a big issue about political economy of land. This will be the main focus of our report is obviously the public and the private sector. What interests do each have? How can we characterize that? Obviously, how do we analyze that in a particular context? But also key in land issues are traditional authorities, civil society organizations. So it isn't just the public and private in a sort of generic form that we must look at. We must deconstruct that a bit and look at these other actors. And also particular vulnerable groups have links to land in different ways that can often be affected by big decisions taken miles away. We finally have a paper from on the motivations of foreign investors, their expectations, how do these, we would want to be looking at how do these match up with local expectations and how much you can expect them to move on corporate social responsibility and voluntary codes. I think this is the last slide. At the end of the report, I expect we will be getting to a point where, at the end of the chapter rather, we'll be getting to a point where we need to talk about land use decision making. How do you balance the trade-offs between using land for different types of uses? Do you want to concentrate on the production of crops for biofuels, or do you want to produce food, or do you want to have more land for urbanization? How do you make those sort of decisions? How do you ensure good governance for that? You can go very far in that. I mean, in Europe we have systems of compulsory purchase and compensation, which for many countries would be a heavy burden to tackle. And so I think there is a question of not making recommendations which are unmanageable, that we need to have be able to suggest things which can be different countries can actually cope with. The last point is that land decisions are often taken at the local level, but we're now talking here in this report about issues which are actually international or national. And there is then, therefore, what we would call in Europe a subsidiarity issue. How do you ensure the decision is taken at the right level? And how do you make sure that people who are taking the land, if at a local level, are aware of some of the constraints or the parameters at the international level? Thank you very much.